So yeah, my neighbors built their fence on my land. And I didn't yell, I didn't sue. I just made their entire backyard completely useless. And the wild part? They basically forced me to do it. I've owned my place for a little over a decade now. Small corner lot. Nothing fancy. White siding starting to fade a bit. Creaky wooden porch that complains every time you step on it. But the real prize was the backyard. It stretched way farther than most houses on the block. Like whoever designed the neighborhood just got tired halfway through and gave my lot the leftovers, which I wasn't complaining about. There was never a fence back there, just open grass, a few old maple trees lining what was supposed to be the property boundary. And for 11 years, nobody questioned it. No disputes, no awkward conversations, just this unspoken agreement that, yeah, this is where things end. And honestly, I liked it that way. It made the whole space feel bigger, calmer, like you weren't boxed in. Then the house behind mine sold. And that's where things started to shift. Young couple moved in. Early 30s maybe. The kind of people who don't just move into a house, they rebrand it. Within days, contractors everywhere. Roof getting ripped off, siding replaced, landscaping trucks rolling in like they were prepping for a magazine shoot. I remember standing on my porch thinking, all right, ambitious, but fine. Not my problem. Yeah, that didn't last long. About 2 weeks in, I wake up to the sound of drilling. Not unusual at that point, but this time it was different, more deliberate. I step outside, coffee in hand, and there it is, a full crew installing a brand new privacy fence. Tall wooden panels, fresh cedar posts, shiny metal brackets catching the sunlight like they just came out of the box. It was clean, expensive looking, the kind of fence people post on Pinterest with captions like backyard goals. Except, something felt off. At first, I couldn't quite place it. You know that weird gut feeling where your brain is like, hey, this doesn't line up, but you can't prove it yet? Yeah, that. The fence just looked too close. Too close to my house. I brushed it off at first, figured maybe it was the angle, maybe I was overthinking it, but the next morning, it was still bugging me. So I grabbed a measuring tape, nothing official, just a gut check kind of move, and walked out to the backyard. Now I knew roughly where the line should be, from the corner maple tree to where the boundary ran. It was always about 30 feet. I measure it. I measure again, slower this time. Still 22. That's when it hit me. 8 feet. 8 feet of my backyard was now sitting on the other side of their brand new fence. And I just stood there for a second, staring at it like maybe the numbers would magically fix themselves. But nope, still 8 feet short. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I walked over and knocked on their door. The husband answers, friendly enough at first. That kind of surface-level polite where you can't quite tell if it's genuine or just default behavior. I explained the situation, calm, straightforward. Hey, I think the fence might have been built a little inside my property line. He doesn't even hesitate. Oh no, our contractor followed the survey stakes. Just like that. Done. Case closed in his mind. So I ask if I can see the survey. He pauses, just a split second, then says he doesn't have it on hand, but reassures me the contractor knows what he's doing. Which, yeah, that's not really how that works. I keep it polite though. I'm not trying to escalate. I just ask if they'd be willing to double-check before finishing the last section. And that's when the tone shifts. He kind of leans against the doorframe, crosses his arms slightly, and goes, we already paid for the job. And honestly, the fence looks great where it is. Not, we'll check. Not, let's figure it out. Just, it looks good, so it stays. And right there, that told me everything. This wasn't a mistake they were worried about fixing. This was a line they were planning to keep. So I didn't argue. Didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten anything. I just nodded, said, all right, and walked back to my house. Because if there's one thing I've learned, the moment someone decides they're right no matter what, talking doesn't do much. You need proof. So I ordered my own survey. 2 days later, a surveyor shows up. Older guy, quiet, the kind of person who doesn't waste words because he doesn't need to. Spent about 3 hours walking the property, measuring, marking, double-checking angles. Real methodical. And when he finished, he placed these bright orange flags along the actual property line, one by one, perfectly straight, and every single one of them sat a full 8 feet inside their fence. I remember just standing there, looking at that line of flags cutting through what was now their backyard, thinking, well, this is going to be interesting. I took photos, clear ones, wide shots, close-ups showing the fence and the flags, and sent them over. No response. Not even a "we got it." A week goes by, nothing. So I knock again. This time, he answers a little differently, less friendly, more guarded. I bring up the survey, show him the photos again, and his reaction? A shrug. A literal shrug. He tells me moving the fence would cost thousands, like that somehow makes the situation optional. Then he hits me with this gem. I mean, you've still got plenty of yard. It's not like you're using that space anyway. And I just stared at him for a second. Because what do you even say to that? So I ask him, are you seriously suggesting I just give you 8 feet of my property? And he doesn't even flinch. Fences are rarely exact. Sometimes they end up a little off. A little off. 8 feet. And then, without another word, he closes the door. Right in my face. And that was it. That was the moment the whole situation changed. Because up until then, I was willing to assume it was a mistake, something we could sort out like normal people. But that wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a decision. And once I realized that, I stopped asking nicely. Not out of anger. Honestly, I wasn't even mad at that point. It was more like clarity. Like, okay, if that's the game we're playing, then I need to understand the rules. So I went back inside, pulled up the property records, started digging, lot lines, zoning details, everything I could find. And that's when I came across something interesting. That 8-foot strip of land. Legally still mine. Didn't matter where the fence was. Didn't matter what their contractor said. Didn't matter how nice it looked. On paper, and in the eyes of the law, that land belonged to me. Which meant I could use it however I wanted, even if their fence was in the way. And that's when the idea started forming, slow at first, then clearer, sharper. Not revenge exactly. More like correction. Because if they were going to treat that space like theirs, then I was going to remind them exactly whose it really was. Just not in the way they expected. Alright, let me pause the story for a second, because this is where things get interesting, not just emotionally, but legally and psychologically too. According to standard procedure, whenever a property boundary is involved, especially before installing something permanent like a fence, you're supposed to verify the survey, not just trust where someone thinks the line is. Contractors mess up, stakes get moved, assumptions get made, and once that fence goes up, it can turn into a very expensive mistake. From a legal perspective, what my neighbor did wasn't just careless, it was risky. Because building on someone else's land doesn't magically transfer ownership. That strip was still mine, no matter how nice their fence looked. Now, there are situations like adverse possession, but that takes years, not 2 weeks and a confident shrug. And here's where it gets deeper. This is a psychological trap. When people invest money into something, like a brand new fence, they become emotionally attached to being right. Admitting a mistake doesn't just mean fixing it. It means accepting loss, embarrassment, and responsibility. So instead, they double down. That's exactly what happened here. And the lesson here is, once someone chooses ego over facts, logic stops working. And at that point, you don't argue, you adapt. So yeah, once I realized that strip of land was still legally mine, everything kind of clicked into place. Not emotionally, but strategically. I wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. I was just figuring out how to use what was already mine. And the funny thing is, the solution wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't involve lawyers or threats or dramatic confrontations. It was quiet, deliberate, and very, very effective. About a week later, a landscaping company pulled up to my driveway early in the morning. Nothing flashy, just a pickup truck, a small excavator, and a couple of guys who looked like they'd done this kind of work 1,000 times before. No announcements, no warning, just work. I walked out, gave them a quick rundown, showed them the survey flags, those same bright orange markers now sitting there like undeniable little reminders of reality, and told them exactly where the line was. They nodded, no questions. Because to them, this wasn't drama, it was just another job. But to my neighbors? Oh, this was about to get very real. They came outside within minutes. I could feel it before I even saw them. That shift in the air when someone realizes something is happening that they don't understand and probably won't like. The husband stepped out onto their deck, squinting a bit, trying to process what he was looking at. A machine digging holes inside his fenced yard. Yeah, inside. Because that's the part that made this whole thing beautiful in a quiet, almost poetic way. The fence didn't define ownership. The land did. And the land said those guys had every right to be there. He walked over, not rushing, but definitely not casual either. That stiff kind of walk people do when they're trying to stay calm, but already irritated. "What's going on?" he asked. No greeting this time. No friendliness. Just tension. I stayed calm, leaned slightly on the shovel one of the workers had set down, and said, "I'm installing posts on my property." I even gestured lightly toward the ground, toward the survey flags. He followed my hand, looked at the flags, then looked at his fence, then back at me. And for a second, he didn't say anything. Because this was the first time reality had physically shown up inside his version of the story. "But this is our yard," he said, a little slower now. And I just shook my head, not aggressively, just matter of fact. "No, your fence is in my yard." That landed. You could see it. Not acceptance. Not yet, but that moment where the brain starts recalculating. He didn't argue right away. Didn't throw out the usual lines. Because it's a lot harder to deny something when there are literal machines digging holes in it. The crew kept working. Hole after hole, evenly spaced, perfectly aligned with those bright orange markers. No guessing, no drifting, just precision. And I didn't rush anything. That's important. Because when you move slowly and confidently, it sends a message. This isn't impulsive, this is planned. By the end of the first day, there were 6 deep holes cut into that strip. By the end of the second day, 12. And then came the posts. Thick steel columns, not decorative, not subtle. The kind of posts that say this is permanent. Each one set deep into concrete, anchored, leveled, locked in place. No shortcuts. No adjustments. No, we'll fix it later. Because there wasn't going to be a later. And the whole time, they were watching. From the deck, from the window, sometimes just standing there in silence. Not interfering, not calling anyone. Just watching their version of the backyard slowly become something else. And here's the part that really shifted things. Up until that point, it still looked like construction. Annoying, sure, but temporary. Something you assume will be gone in a few days. But then, we added the planters. Large wooden boxes, about 4 feet tall, running the entire length of those steel posts. Clean, solid, intentionally placed. Filled with fresh soil. And then, we planted bamboo. Not decorative little plants. Not something subtle. Fast-growing bamboo. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that takes over space. Now, if you've never seen bamboo grow, let me tell you, it doesn't creep, it doesn't slowly blend in, it rises. Fast. Within weeks, you could already see the difference. Green shoots pushing upward, multiplying, thickening. Within a couple of months, it was a wall. 8 feet tall. Dense. Alive. Unapologetic. And just like that, their backyard changed. Completely. That brand new deck they had built now faced a wall of green. The sunlight that used to hit their patio? Gone. Filtered through layers of leaves and stalks. The expensive landscaping they poured time and money into? Sitting in shade. All day. Every day. And I didn't have to say a word. Because the message was already there, growing taller by the week. And eventually, they came back. A few weeks after the bamboo really filled in, I hear a knock on my door. Not loud, not aggressive, just different. I open it, and there he is. Same guy, but not the same energy. No crossed arms. No leaning on the frame like he owned the conversation. Just standing there. "Hey, can we talk?" he asked. And I stepped outside. We stood there for a second, quiet, both of us looking past each other toward that wall of bamboo that hadn't been there a couple months ago. "It's kind of ruining our yard," he said. Careful with the wording. Not, "you're ruining it." Just, the situation. And I nodded. Yeah, I can see that. No sarcasm. No attitude. Because this wasn't about gloating. This was about resolution. He hesitated, then added. "The shade, the view. It's just not what we expected." And there it was. Expectation. The idea that things would stay the way they wanted, even if they weren't built that way. So I reminded him, calmly, clearly. "Your fence is still on my land." Not louder, not sharper, just undeniable. He looked down for a second, then back up. "Would you consider removing the planters?" And that's the moment everything balanced. Because now it was a negotiation. Not a dismissal, not a shrug, a real conversation. So I gave him a real answer. Maybe, if the fence gets moved back to the correct boundary. No threats, no ultimatums, just a condition. And this time, he didn't argue, didn't deflect. didn't say it was too expensive. He just nodded and said, "Okay." 2 weeks later, the same type of truck that showed up months ago came back. Fence company. Except this time, they weren't building. They were undoing. Panel by panel, post by post, everything that had been placed wrong came down. And for the first time since all this started, you could actually see the space again. The real space. The full 8 feet that had always been there, just hidden behind someone else's decision. They remeasured. Carefully this time. Double-checked everything. And rebuilt the fence. Exactly where it should have been from the start. Right along those original survey flags. No shortcuts. No assumptions. No close enough. Just correct. And once that fence was no longer sitting on my land, I held up my end. The planters came out. The bamboo was removed. The wall disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. And slowly, the yard came back. Sunlight returned. The deck opened up again. The space felt normal. And my backyard? It got something back too. 8 feet of grass. 8 feet of space. 8 feet that had never actually left, just temporarily occupied. And the best part? No lawsuits. No screaming matches. No police. Just actions. Clear, controlled, and entirely within the rules. Because in the end, I didn't take anything from them. I just used what was already mine. So yeah, that's how it ended. No dramatic courtroom scene. No viral neighborhood meltdown. No one getting dragged off in handcuffs. Just a fence quietly moved 8 feet back to where it should have been the whole time, and a backyard that suddenly made sense again. But if you think this story is about a fence, it's really not. It's about something way more common, and honestly, way more dangerous. It's about what happens when people confuse confidence with correctness. Because if you rewind this whole situation, none of it had to happen. Not the tension, not the awkward conversations, definitely not the bamboo wall. All it would have taken was one simple decision on their part, to check, to verify, to pause for a second and say, "Hey, what if we're wrong?" But they didn't. And that's where things started to spiral. The lesson here is small assumptions can turn into big consequences real fast, especially when there's money, pride, and property involved. Now let's talk about something people don't usually think about, escalation. Because most people imagine conflict as this loud, explosive thing, arguments, shouting, maybe even threats. But real escalation? It's quiet. It's subtle. It's when someone ignores a reasonable concern, then doubles down, then dismisses it completely. And by the time they realize they miscalculated, the situation has already moved past the point of easy fixes. That's exactly what happened here. They had multiple off-ramps. The first conversation? That could have solved it. The survey photos? Definitely could have solved it. Even the second conversation at the door, still salvageable. But every time, they chose the same path: minimize, deflect, dismiss. And here's where it gets a little deeper. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into, especially in situations involving ownership or territory. When someone invests time, money, or effort into something, they start to tie their identity to it. So when that thing gets challenged, it doesn't feel like a correction. It feels like an attack. And instead of stepping back and reassessing, they protect it, even when they're wrong. Especially when they're wrong. Because admitting a mistake doesn't just mean fixing it. It means accepting loss, embarrassment, and responsibility. And a lot of people would rather dig deeper into a bad decision than face that. Now, from a practical standpoint, there's another takeaway here, and this one matters if you own property or ever plan to. Always verify your boundaries. Not kind of. Not, the contractor said so. Actually verify them. Because fences, sheds, driveways, anything permanent, can turn into legal headaches if they're even a few inches off, let alone 8 feet. And here's something else most people don't realize. You don't always need to fight loud to resolve something. In fact, sometimes the most effective response is controlled, quiet, and completely within the rules. What I did wasn't revenge. It wasn't about making their life miserable. It was about creating a situation where the problem became impossible to ignore. Because as long as that fence benefited them, there was no urgency to fix it. But the moment that same space started working against them, everything changed. And that's an important distinction. I didn't force them to move the fence. I just removed their ability to comfortably ignore the fact that it was wrong. And once that comfort disappeared, so did the resistance. Now, could this have gone differently? Sure. There are situations where things escalate further. legal battles, neighbor feuds that last years, people refusing to back down no matter what. And honestly, that's why this outcome matters. Because it shows there's a middle ground between do nothing and go nuclear. You can stand your ground without losing control. You can be firm without being reckless. And you can solve a problem without turning it into a war. But, and this is important, that only works if you actually understand your position. If I hadn't checked the survey, if I didn't know for a fact where the boundary was, none of this would have worked. It would have just been opinion versus opinion. And that's where things get messy. So yeah, the fence got moved. The bamboo came down. The yard went back to normal. But the real shift was understanding that sometimes the strongest move isn't the loudest one. It's the one that makes the other person realize, on their own, that they don't have a better option. And if you take anything from this story, let it be this. Don't give away what's yours just because someone else is confident enough to take it. Because confidence doesn't change facts. And eventually, facts have a way of showing up, whether people are ready for them or not.